Not like that.
There we go.
It's your choice.
I just want a good voice.
Don't call me.
I just want to
He's dead.
have a good natural voice. I can't make it a fake one. I can't make a fake
I want no special.
Yeah, it does sound like a sneeze.
Cries for 10 seconds and it's like, I want no vendettas. Walk a little straighter, daddy. Excuse you? Side to side. Excuse you?
I'm just trying to figure out how to read this.
Footsteps make me dizzy and no matter how I try. Little Billy Currington there.
You're good.
Okay, let's just start.
I'm ready.
The mini stand
5 minutes.
is coming in out of me, and I just want to like grab
Talking
it.
like that though.
Alright, I'm
It's
fine.
like
So
a-
what's the
Hair
Yeah.
Oh, mine is done.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
walking down the street last
You're
Saturday
gonna go
night.
to the
What is the deal?
But then is that for business out here?
I don't know.
I would love to
I can't
do
believe that
but
qualified as
I am
comedy.
doing a Halloween
comedy was
celebration
huge
that day,
in the 80s, and so
which is this weekend, which is tomorrow actually, by
That's
the
why I
way.
say,
Halloween is tomorrorow.
yeah, I won't be there anyway. I got a football game to go to.
So you guys will be going along with the audience as well, and I'll cue all of y'all.
Okay.
We don't yell, do we?
You will. There's an applause, there's awe, and then there's terror, and I'll hold up a sign for intermission.
Cool. I thought about being that really sarcastic person yesterday in rehearsal when it says it no, I'm yelling. It's like wanting to go, aww.
Oh my god.
It's supposed to be like,
it's so cute.
there you go.
Yeah.
And believe
Yeah.
it. Maybe you have.
Look at the little spaceship.
3 minutes and 30 seconds. This is what I'm saying. I would have been better if this was like being like
I
video.
actually saw a deep
Attention everybody, cast members included. Could you please silence your phones and make sure they are on possibly airplane mode as well, just to make sure. Thank you.
I agree with Paige. Hey, in case of an emergency, the exit is that way. Just head straight out both those doors, and then there's a door to your left.
In case of emergency.
I don't think we'll be able to get out quickly enough with that door.
Yeah.
That's
If there
true.
was an emergency, we'd all just like be stacking up against that door.
Let's have someone super strong pull. So like,
Can all of you guys see this right here?
breathe.
Yeah.
Pull the door.
Barely?
Yeah.
Baby.
Okay. Not right now.
I would suggest,
Here, do a test. Do a test so we can read them.
I would
Yeah.
suggest if you're doing crowd noise or clapping, clap away from the
Yeah.
microphone. Yeah, right behind you. There you go. If not, that's going to be really loud.
Turn on Turmoil and terror.
Seems to work.
We won't actually do it that way, but
Wait.
Oh no!
Turn more on.
We didn't decide how we're doing it because I'm going to do it the way we do it.
Alright.
which one is the
bell?
You
oh
know?
no!
Overpower my
I
drive.
thought we were doing it the other
Do what
way.
Bill Hader does.
Oh no!
When he puts up the terror sign, be like,
What's that? What's that? Is that?
I was like, I am white. I am Egyptian. I am Egypt. I am Egypt. Yes. I am the whole country.
well,
Let me just add Africa in there. I'm the whole
specifically
continent.
goes into the bedroom.
Is that safe?
That's funny.
Actually, no, it's just me being gay.
I do
Intercontinental.
not say.
Yeah, there you go.
Intercontinental.
I am a man of.
I tell you, English is a hard
Have you heard the
language.
new Blake Shelton song?
You need to send me all your song recommendations.
Jesus got a tight grip on my soul.
No, Jesus.
Personally, these midterms have a tight grip on my soul. I am
That's the way you said that. Jesus has a tight grip on my soul.
a quick trust in it will always be over.
Kanye?
No, it's Blake
I
Shelton.
love that.
I don't know what else to tell you about it.
Jesus is
I need
It
them
is,
too.
yeah.
The French did it too.
Most of them.
You'll just play.
But not like they were.
So the only person like this big rim coat at the beginning, and then everyone else just. I just love singing.
Is that like a country song or something?
It is.
So,
Blake Shelton.
I'm just kind of doing this.
Yeah, like Hugh, it's basically like Hugh Tower.
I could be.
Okay, I don't know.
I could do that.
So I don't know who to
I know, I don't even
The
know.
only person
what's
that
going
wins
on.
the game.
Okay, and when
He was going to be John Jared.
Yes. Alright, so you're right, you know.
Ew. You know what? If you're driving, you force them to do whatever you want.
No, I can't sing either, so we're already saying, and that's what makes it good, because I can be a bad guy. I go out there and sing, and I'm just so
But
bad,
that's
and
the
it sucks, it's bad, I'm good.
If it's their car though, if it's their car and they want to play a certain song, play them. I can't stand country.
Yeah, I had
If
no
you're
other
not,
way
like
to,
especially hardcore country, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like really hardcore. Because there's some country
Oh,
songs that are
no.
just like
I was ready. I was like, ooh. I was sitting down.
like the
Yeah,
Old Town
I-
one.
this-
Like that's okay. That's okay level.
Yes.
So he's the only of the talent I'll keep.
Yes, because it's just like when we start this.
Yeah, so is that the only time I'll keep him or will I keep him?
That'll,
Or after the intermission?
after intermission, I'll tell you who to cue.
Yeah.
Let's do this.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll come in.
Okay. Alright, so yeah, they will let me know.
We're starting in 5.
5.
Oh, and 5?
3.
2.
Oh, so we're starting late. Big difference.
So wonderful.
So be careful with your page turn. Don't be all loud, y'all.
Yeah.
Now I'm gonna do it because you told me
Yeah,
not to.
he is
Trying
a
to
knock.
slide off.
I'm gonna punch all of you in the throat.
Alright. Is everyone ready in here?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
as
go
ready
for
as
it.
I'll ever be.
Go for it.
I know that song. Who sings it?
I don't remember.
What's it called?
I don't remember.
I'm like, what is it?
Minutes, y'all.
Thank you, 3.
It was 5 minutes. Okay.
Yeah.
I was like, said 5 like a long time ago.
We've been on the air the whole time.
Like
It's just
5
dead
minutes feel longer
silence.
when you just like
Or a lot
want
of
to get
weird.
something started, but when you like want to do something that you
A minute is
really
all depends on
excited
what
for.
side of the bathroom door you're on.
Yeah, I bet that was like so true.
You're like, what?
You get it? Because like if you're there and you're in the bathroom, that minute is raised. But if you're outside, that minute is like.
Oh, okay. I thought you were like being serious. Like, time zones are at bath.
Oh, no.
Time dilation.
I was like, what?
But it's so true though. Time passes quickly when you're having a good time.
You know.
No, like that's a different thought. It's its own thought, separate from the
Separate
bathroom.
from the bathroom, you just talking.
It just gets worse the older you get.
Oh, you're right.
Like in the middle of a line. Or it's even better if you do it to other people. Just saying.
That's wrong.
It's funny though.
See?
Do they know we can hear them?
Yeah,
Okay, they're really loud.
I know. They're gonna be quiet as soon as it gets started, or we're gonna shut the door.
Yeah.
Trying to hold dignity.
Yeah, exactly.
I think Spencer has to come back in here somewhere.
Oh yeah.
It's raining all day. So
It's like
rain all
real.
weekend.
He didn't tell me it's raining today.
There's an 80%
The chance that it's already raining.
It's gonna snow next Friday. Anyone had any
No,
plans?
I don't even want to hear that.
No.
I hate snow, so I'm just letting you guys know it's gonna snow next Friday.
It's the first snow of fall.
Ohio.
Dude, seriously. Can't even. Don't wait, it's further from here.
Columbia Broadcasting System and its affiliated stations present Orson Welles in the Mercury Theater on the air in The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. Ladies and gentlemen, the director of the Mercury Theater and star of these broadcasts, Orson Welles. We know now that in the early years of the 20th century, this world was being watched closely by intelligences greater than man's, and yet as mortal as his own. We know now that as human beings busied themselves about their various concerns, they were scrutinized and studied, perhaps almost as narrowly as a man with a microscope might scrutinize the transient creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. With infinite complacence, people went to and fro over the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which, by chance or design, man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space. Yet, across an immense ethereal gulf, minds that are to our minds as ours are to the beasts in the jungle, intellects vast, cool, and unsympathetic, regarded this earth with envious eyes, and slowly and surely drew their plans against us. In the 39th year of the 20th century came the Great Disillusionment. It was near the end of October. Business was better. The war scare was over. More men were back at work. Sales were picking up. On this particular evening, October 30th, the Crosley service estimated that 32 million people were listening in on radios.
For the next 24 hours, not much change in temperature. A slight atmospheric disturbance of undetermined origin is reported over Nova Scotia, causing a low-pressure area to move down rather rapidly over the northeastern states, bringing a forecast of rain, accompanied by winds of light gale force. Maximum temperature 66, minimum 48. This weather report comes to you from the Government Weather Bureau. We take you now to the Meridian Room in the Hotel Park Plaza in downtown New York, where you'll be entertained by the music of Ramon Raquello and his orchestra.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. From the Meridian Room in the Park Plaza Hotel in New York City, we bring you the music of Ramon Raquello and his orchestra. With a touch of Spanish, Ramon Raquello leads off with La Comparsita.
Ladies and gentlemen, we interrupt our program of dance music to bring you a special bulletin from the Intercontinental Radio Booth. At 20 minutes before 8 Central Time, Professor Phil of the Mount Jennings Observatory of Chicago, Illinois, reports observing several explosions of incandescent gas occurring at regular intervals on the planet Mars. The spectroscope indicates the gas to be hydrogen and moving towards the Earth with enormous velocity. Professor Pearson of the Observatory at Princeton confirms Farrell's observation and describes the phenomenon as, quote, like a jet of blue flame shot from a gun, unquote. We're returning now to the music of Ramon Raquello, playing for you in the Meridian Room of the Park Plaza Hotel, situated in downtown New York.
tune that never loses favor, the ever-popular Stardust, Ramon Raquello and his orchestra.
Ladies and gentlemen, following on the news given in our bulletin a moment ago, the Government Meteorological Bureau has requested a large observatories of the country to keep an astronomical watch on any further disturbances occurring on the planet Mars. Due to the unusual nature of this occurrence, we have arranged an interview with a noted astronomer, Professor Pearson, who will give us his views on this event. In a few moments, we will take you to the Princeton Observatory at Princeton, New Jersey. We return you until then to the music of Ramon Raquello and his orchestra. We are now ready to take you to the Princeton Observatory at Princeton, where Carl Phillips, our commentator, will interview Professor Richard Pearson, famous astronomer. We take you now to Princeton, New Jersey.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Carl Phillips speaking to you from the Observatory of Princeton. I'm standing in a large semicircular room, pitch black except for an oblong split in the ceiling. Through this opening, I can see a sprinkling of stars that cast a kind of frosty glow over the intricate mechanism of the huge telescope. The ticking sound you hear is the vibration of the clockwork. Professor Pearson stands directly above me on a small platform, peering through the giant lens. I ask you to be patient, ladies and gentlemen, during any delay that may arise during our interview. Besides his ceaseless watch of the heavens, Professor Pearson may be interrupted by telephone or other communications during this period. He is in constant touch with the astronomical centers of the world. Professor, may I begin our questions?
At any time, Mr. Phillips.
Professor, would you please tell our radio audience exactly what you see as you observe the planet Mars through the telescope?
Nothing unusual at the moment, Mr. Phillips. A red disk swimming in a blue sea. Transverse stripes across the disk. Quite distinct now because Mars happens to be the point nearest the Earth. In opposition, as we call it.
In your opinion, what do these transverse stripes signify, Professor Pearson?
Not canals, I can assure you, Mr. Phillips.
I see.
Although that's the popular conjecture of those who imagine Mars to be inhabited. From a scientific viewpoint, the stripes are merely the result of atmospheric conditions peculiar to the planet.
Then you're quite convinced as a scientist that living intelligence as we know it does not exist on Mars.
I'd say the chances against it are 1,000 to 1.
And yet, how do you account for these gas interruptions occurring on the surface of the planet at regular intervals?
Mr. Phillips, I cannot account for it.
By the way, Professor, for the benefit of our listeners, how far is Mars from the Earth?
Approximately 40 million miles.
Well, that seems a safe enough distance.
Thank you.
Just a moment, ladies and gentlemen. Someone has just handed Professor Pearson a message. While he reads it, let me remind you that we are speaking to you from the observatory in Princeton, New Jersey, where we are interviewing the world-famous astronomer, Professor Pearson. Oh, 1 second, please. Professor Pearson has just passed me a message, which he has just received. Professor, may I read the message to the listening audience?
Certainly, Mr. Phillips.
Ladies and gentlemen, I shall read you a wire addressed to Professor Pearson from Dr. Gray of the National History Museum, New York. Quote, 9:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Seismograph registered shock of almost earthquake intensity occurring within a radius of 20 miles of Princeton. Please investigate. Signed, Lloyd Gray, Chief of Astronomical Division, unquote. Professor Pearson, could this occurrence possibly have something to do with the disturbances observed on the planet Mars?
Hardly, Mr. Phillips. This is probably a meteorite of unusual size, and its arrival at this particular time is merely a coincidence. However, we shall conduct a search as soon as daylight permits.
Thank you, Professor. Ladies and gentlemen, for the past 10 minutes, we've been speaking to you from the observatory at Princeton, bringing you a special interview with Professor Pearson, noted astronomer. This is Carl Phillips speaking. We are returning you now to our New York studio.
Toronto, Canada, Professor Morse of Macmillan University reports observing a total of 3 explosions on the planet Mars between the hours of 7:45 p.m. and 9:20 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This confirms earlier reports received from American observatories. Now, nearer home, comes a special bulletin from Trenton, New Jersey. It is reported that at 8:50 p.m., a huge flaming object believed to be a meteorite fell on the farm in the neighborhood of Grover's Mill, New Jersey, 22 miles from Trenton. The flash in the sky was visible within a radius of several hundred miles, and the noise of the impact was heard as far north as Elizabeth. We have dispatched a special mobile unit to the scene, and we'll have our commentator, Carl Phillips, give you a word picture on the scene as soon as he can reach there from Princeton. In the meantime, we take you to the Hotel Martinet in Brooklyn, where Bobby Millett and his orchestra are offering a program of dance music. We take you now to Grover's Mill.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Carl Phillips again, out at the Wilmouth Farm, Grover's Mill, New Jersey. Professor Pearson and myself have made the 11 miles from Princeton in 10 minutes. Well, I hardly know where to begin to paint for you a word picture of the strange scene before my eyes. Like something out of a modern Arabian Nights. While I just got here, I haven't had a chance to look around yet. I guess that's it. Yes, I guess that's the thing directly in front of me, half buried in a vast pit. Must have struck with terrific force. The ground is covered with splinters of a tree it must have struck on its way down. What I can see of the object itself doesn't look very much like a meteor, at least not like the meteors I've seen. It looks more like a huge cylinder. It has a diameter of, what would you say, Professor Pearson?
What's that?
What would you say? What is the diameter of this?
About 30 yards.
About 30 yards. The metal on the sheath is, well, I've never seen anything like it. The color is sort of a yellowish white. Curious spectators are pressing close to the object in spite of the efforts of the police to keep them back. They're getting in front of my line of vision. Would you mind staying to one side, please?
One side there, one side. Hey.
While the policemen are pushing the crowd back, here's Mr. Wilmoth, owner of the farm here. He may have some interesting facts to add. Mr. Wilmoth, would you please tell the radio audience as much as you remember of this rather unusual visitor that dropped into your backyard? Step closer, please. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Mr. Wilmoth.
Well, I was listening to the radio.
Closer and louder, please.
Pardon me?
Louder, please, and closer.
Yes, sir. I was listening to the radio and kind of drowsy. That professor fellow was talking about Mars, so I was half dozing and half,
Yes, Mr. Wilmoth. And then what happened?
Well, as I was saying, I was listening to the radio kind of halfway.
Yes, Mr. Wilmoth. And then you saw something?
Well, not first off. I heard something.
And what did you hear?
A hissing sound like this. Kind of like a 4th of July rocket.
Yes, and then what?
I turned my head out the window and would have swore I was to sleep and dreaming.
Yes.
I seen that kind of greenish streak, and then zingo! Something smacked the ground, knocked me clean out of my chair.
Well, were you frightened, Mr. Wilmoth?
Well, I ain't quite sure. I reckon I was kind of riled.
Thank you, Mr. Wilmoth. Thank you very much.
But want me to tell you some more?
No, that's quite all right. That's plenty. Ladies and gentlemen, you've just heard Mr. Wilmoth, owner of the farm where the thing has fallen. I wish I could convey the atmosphere, the background of this fantastic scene. Hundreds of cars are parked in a field in back of us, and the police